How big is this comic going to be? How many years of my life are going to be spent slaving away at this behemoth? Oh my god, someone please help me. Okay, so today we are talking about scope, my friendos. Scope refers to the overall size of your story. It's kind of like a scale for epicness, but how do you determine how long a story is going to be? My short answer involves math, so calm down. I've co-opted a formula that I learned from Mary Robinette Kowal, and I have alternate a bit to suit the needs of us comic writers. It goes something like this. You add the number of main characters with main locations together, and then you multiply that by 4. And then you take that number, you set it aside for later. The next part is a little tricky because it involves something I haven't really talked about before, but you count the amount of mace/mice quotient items that are involved in your story. I'll leave a link to something on that in the description. Maybe I'll make a video on it later, but you take that number and you multiply it by 1.5. Whatever number you get from there, you multiply it with the number that you set aside, and bam! That is your estimated page count. Now, if you manage to get through the math, I suppose I will reward you by talking a little bit about why and how this works. Scope is linked to the 3 elements that you need to put into the formula. It's related to your plot, characters, and setting. Each time you add one of these elements, your scope is going to widen. And it doesn't just go for fantasy and sci-fi. Gilmore Girls isn't 7 seasons long because they added wizard battles. Side note, could someone please write a comic that is Gilmore Girls with wizard battles? If you already have this comic, link it to me. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it got that long with an increasing cast of characters and locations, and some plots. TV also works a little different because it's series oriented, but we're gonna set that aside. Now, that isn't to say that fantasy and sci-fi don't run longer, but this is more to do with world building. But it won't make your story bigger in the long term. World building is more like a startup fee. It's like a one-time fee that'll cost you a few additional pages. And you need to remember that not all fantasy is the epic fantasy variety. What you need to understand is that each major character and setting not only adds an initial introduction, but it adds a plot as well. Major character obviously will add a full-blown subplot and some amount of meaningful scenes. Less obvious, setting does the same thing. Settings have stories to them. They have plot attached to them. Think of your settings as if you were writing like a stage play. Settings are tangible. They need to be designed. They are silent characters with stories of their own. They are inextricably linked to the scope of your story. Okay, so the mice quotient refers to the 4 types of plots that can happen. There is milieu story, about leaving a place and returning to it. A dragon leaves the nest, and then after a harrowing journey, returns to the nest. There is idea stories, which are about having a question and finding the answer. Mother Dragon is like, where is my baby? And then the baby is found. Well, there's your answer. That's an idea story. Then there's character stories. These stories are about a character's internal struggle. Dragon is a weakling, learns to accept self for internal strengths, is kind of a character story. And then there is event story, which is about the status quo being destroyed and then being restabilized. Dragon destroys village rebuilds. That's an event story. These are kind of less tangible elements. They're less tangible, they're hard to kind of explain, but smaller stories will deal with 1 or 2 of these types of stories within them. Like they'll have a character milieu story, so like character location leaving story, or they'll have like just a character story. But larger stories will deal with typically like 2 or more of these types of stories within them. Usually more. Okay, it's confusing, but hopefully you wrapped your head around it a little bit. Adding each of these types of stories will add a layer of depth to your main plot. If you start adding like a character arc or a milieu arc or a event arc. As you layer these, you're gonna make your story like exponentially bigger. So you gotta pay attention to that. So to control the size of your story, you either need to add elements or subtract them. So you either add elements of the mice quotient or you take them away, or you add characters, take them away, add settings, take them away. That's how you control the scope of your story. And all of this is easier said than done, and will kind of change the story you're writing at a fundamental level. Often it might be easier just to try and design a story that fits the desired scope rather than trying to rather than trying to like finick with something that is already of a certain scope. Not that it can't be done. You just need to remember when you're starting something from the bottom up to keep the character and settings in the range you want them. So before I sign off, I want to consider this all in a more practical sense. How many pages do you like? Start by thinking like this. How many pages do you complete every month? Look at that number, like stare at that number, absorb that number, and then times that number by 12. And that is your yearly page count, probably less. If you divide that by whatever estimated page count you got, that is how many years it's going to take to finish that comic. Is that a commitment you are ready for? Do you want to go bigger, smaller? Like, that's up to you. And again, when you write your scripts, it's probably going to change. Hopefully it'll stay in that range. You can kind of tailor your writing to try and stay in that range. But that estimate is a good start to look at the story and consider if you want to invest all this time in this story at this time. Anyways, hopefully this advice was useful to all of you and helps you gain a little bit of control over your scope. Anyways, thanks for all of your support. It's very appreciated. I don't have anything exciting to tell you this week. Hopefully we'll get like cool announcements next week. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time I decide to show up. It's Fridays. I always show up on Fridays. Okay, bye.